Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The organization, Amnesty International, described human rights violations in Iraq as disastrous. In its published annual report, it criticized the multinational and Iraqi forces for violating Iraqi prisoners' civil rights. It cited a number of violations, including torture and false imprisonment. They have not been charged, tried, or convicted for these violations. Amnesty International also confirmed that some violations were so severe that they can be listed in the same category as war crimes and crimes against humanity. It also urged the Iraqi Authority and the British and American forces to guarantee civil rights of the detainees and to put an end to all forms of abuses and torture.
The picture is dark, and it is not pleasant regarding human rights violations in Iraq. These were the findings of Amnesty International. Thousands of Iraqi prisoners are still held in public and secret detention centers. They are subjected to countless accounts of abuse and violations. The report confirmed that human rights violations in Iraq are still disastrous. Iraqis are still haunted by images of the Abu Ghraib prison scandal and the savage beating incident of Iraqi teenagers in Basra. These heartbreaking images have not awakened the conscience of the international community, and they were indeed ignored by politicians in Baghdad, London, and Washington. Since the invasion of Iraq in April 2003, the American forces have detained thousands of Iraqis. The prisoners have not been charged, indicted, or put on trial. They were also denied to file motions for compensation in a court of law. The organization Amnesty International has confirmed that the American forces have detained more than 14,000 Iraqis. They were housed in a number of detention centers, including the Abu Ghraib prison west of Baghdad and the Buqqa prison south of Iraq. Some of those prisoners have been held for nearly 2 years and they have not yet been charged of any crime. Others were finally released, but they were neither given reasons for their detention nor were they offered any apology or compensation for any jail time.
فيما أن آخرين أوفر حظا أخلي سبيلهم من دون أن يقدم لهم أي تفسير أو اعتذار ولا تعويض عن فترة الحبس.
Peace and prayers be upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad and his descendants. Terrorism, terrorism, terrorism.
تأسف واستهتار ترى فيه المنظمة تنكرا واضحا لأبسط حقوق الإنسان التي تضمنها.
Amnesty International contended that these blatant abuses of Iraqi prisoners are human rights violations and they are against international laws. Among these violations were the absence of due process and denying prisoners the right to correspond with the outside world. The report also confirmed that torture is still used as a punishment method in Iraqi prisons by the Iraqi and American forces. Beatings by plastic wires, electric shocks, and sexual abuses are some of the torture techniques used against Iraqi detainees. Amnesty International has listed these torture incidents in the category of war crimes and crimes against humanity. It was alarmed because representatives of NGOs in Iraq were unable to monitor conditions of prison facilities or protect safety of prisoners. It also urged the Iraqi Authority and the American and British forces to take necessary measures to protect the civil rights of detainees and guarantee their safety. It announced that it may open an independent and transparent investigation into any claim of civil rights violations inside Iraqi detention centers, and it will bring to trial any official responsible for such violations.
وتقديم أي مسؤول عن هذه الانتهاكات إلى المحاكمة أيا كانت صفته.
2 weeks after a near civil war erupted in Iraq, the wave of violence continues to claim the lives of dozens of innocent victims amidst politicians' fears that the political process will collapse. The American Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, accused the Iranian National Guards of infiltrating into Iraq.
Iraqi military personnel, civilians, as well as religious holy sites have become the target of explosions. The sound of the explosions drowns out all other voices. There were 2 booby-trapped cars that targeted 2 American military buses, killing 1 person and injuring 5 others in the Zafarina neighborhood south of the capital and Al-Khadra neighborhood to the west. A 3rd car exploded in the city of Hilla, injuring 3 traffic officers. A 4th car also exploded, but did not lead to any casualties. However, the incident compelled the police to enforce a curfew on all cars because they received information that a suicide bomber intended to explode another car.
We have information that booby-trapped cars are heading towards this province. We saw a black car. We did not get near it. All the doors were opened. They were very close. The traffic police called the Central Command to bring a bomb squad to dismantle the bomb.
Unknown assailants exploded a Sunni market in Tikrit in the north without killing or injuring anyone. The violence did not only come in the form of explosions, but it also included attacks carried out by unknown armed assailants. One attack targeted a police patrol, killing 3 officers and injuring 4 others in the northern city of Biji. Unknown armed men also fired at journalists working for Baghdad TV, killing 1 person in Mosul. The security tensions in Iraq were further represented by the broadcasting of a video of 3 hostages, 3 Canadians and a Briton, who were kidnapped in Iraq last December. The video shows the hostage pleading to their country's leaders and Gulf state leaders to intervene to help their release.
The police in the Kut province found thousands of missiles and explosives in a number of hideouts in the area of Omaniyah. This came amidst a search and raid campaign that was carried out by the police, who were looking for terrorists and hideouts there.
The police forces in the province said that they found a weapons stockpile in the Omaniyah that included 7,057mm anti-tank missiles and 30 130mm anti-tank missiles and 93 kilograms of gunpowder and other explosives. These operations were conducted in the province of Kut after police chiefs indicated they were looking for weapons and terrorists' hideouts.
The Martyr's Sadr office in Baghdad has been able to release a group of hostages from one of the criminal gangs. Members of the gang were captured and legal measures were taken against them.
Amid security challenges and an escalation in terrorist attacks, the citizens' awareness about security is on the rise. The Sadr office in Sadr City was able to release 2 hostages who were kidnapped by a terrorist organization that carries out kidnappings, killings, and thievery.
At 7:30, in the Muhandisin neighborhood on Palestine Street, a KIA car came. The people pointed a gun at me and pushed me in the car. He said, "Come with me, you are a terrorist." They blindfolded me and took me to the Qanat. 4 of them were in the KIA. As we were going to the Qanat, I heard and saw the sirens of a police car. Then a man came out of the car and talked to the police outside, then came back. As soon as we got to a home, they blindfolded me again.
I was leaving school. Just as I was leaving school, they kidnapped me.
Where were you?
Palestine Street.
How many people were in the car?
5. They said your father is a spy for the Americans. Then they said they wanted money.
The office of the martyr Sadr confirmed that they obtained information about kidnappings, compelling them to investigate and try to release the hostages.
Information was obtained by the martyr Sadr's office that indicated that a terrorist gang was carrying out kidnappings, killings, and thievery, and that they had kidnapped many people. After an investigation, we confirmed that this information was correct. We raided the hideout, freed the hostages, and returned them to their families.
The hostages expressed their strong praise and called on officials to strengthen these security measures.
We thank all the good people in the Mahdi army. May God be pleased with them. God willing, Muqtada Sadr remain forever.
May God forgive and protect them and make them victorious. Muqtada Sadr is a great man. May God protect him and protect his army, the Imam al-Mahdi army.
The latest escalations in terrorist acts and the targeting of Iraqi civilians has been met with implementing a new security plan on the one hand and raising security awareness of citizens on the other hand. The Sadr office contributed by helping to capture the terrorist groups.
As soon as the Iraqi Shiite leader Muqtada al-Sadr arrived to Basra from Iran, he called for a joint Sunni Shiite demonstration to demand from the multinational forces, especially the Americans, that they leave Iraq. He also called on Shiites and Sunnis to treat each other in a brotherly manner.
At 2 a.m. exactly, the American forces withdrew from the place so that it could be bombed. This comes after a series of attacks. It is not the first attack and it will not be the last one. Many attacks are still to come, so be cautious and be responsible. You are entrusted with our religion, the future of our sect, Iraq, and the Muslim people. Some want to prevent the occupation forces from leaving Iraq, even according to a legitimate timetable, as they call it. The most important thing that needs to be done so security can be established in Iraq is the withdrawal of the occupiers. The closer we get to each other and love one another, the more the occupation divides us. Look at what the British did in this prominent and beloved governorate. They beat the Iraqis as if they are not humans. We got rid of Saddam Hussein, may God curse him, and now have another dictatorship, the dictatorship of Britain, America, and Israel. Be aware of the Western plans. I call in all believers, Sunnis and Shiites, to treat each other in a brotherly manner and hold a joint demonstration for the sake of Iraq and for the sake of the pure Imams.
Well, in just over 2 hours, Israel's pre-election television campaign ads will hit the airwaves. You've been warned. Campaign analysts say the ads have had relatively little influence on the voting public in past elections. But this year, with nearly 20% of Israelis still undecided, these notorious campaign jingles plugging 33 separate parties may help more than a few confused voters decide what to do at the ballot box on March 28th. Dan Diker has more.
Primetime programming, watch out. Starting tonight, the war of the campaign ads is slated to begin, and several million Israelis will be treated to more than an hour of battling jingles and lots of pre-election promises. Kadima is banking on the public's embrace of its founder, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, now lying comatose in a Jerusalem hospital. Kadima strategists believe that the party's campaign promos can convince voters that acting Prime Minister Ehud Olmert is Sharon's most natural successor. The ads convey a positive theme that Kadima will succeed in formally establishing Israel's eastern border in the West Bank. Kadima hopes its other secret weapon will be its political attack on Likud chairman Benjamin Netanyahu. The ads say that Bibi is the same Bibi as 1996, referring to his last term as prime minister. The camera zooms in on Netanyahu's eyes. It's Kadima's visual reminder of what Sharon had claimed about his Likud rival, that Netanyahu can't be trusted. For its part, the Likud is also taking off the gloves against Kadima, many of whom bolted the Likud just several months ago with Ariel Sharon. The ads emphasize that Olmert is no Sharon, and that previous centrist parties, such as Shinui and the Third Way, have disappeared into thin air. The ads also point out that Olmert and Avi Dichter's promise of a post-election withdrawal in the West Bank contradicts Sharon's last stated position before he fell ill. The Likud is clear about its position on the West Bank. Any further territorial withdrawals will be grabbed by Hamas and its Iranian patrons. The Labour Party is attempting to carve out a distinct political niche next to Kadima, its main rival in this election. Labour's message focuses on overall security against terror, unemployment, and poverty. The ads are upbeat. They present the party as a closely knit professional team who can deliver on its new social contract with the Israeli voter. And that is to close the country's wide social and economic gaps. Aside from the three major parties, there are 30 smaller parties vying for voter support. Most of these small parties, such as the Green Party featured here, face a fierce and uphill battle to make it over the minimum voter threshold and gain entry into the 17th Knesset. Jan Diker, IBA News.
And what should we make of this year's crop of political ads? A short while ago, I spoke with political science professor Avraham Diskin of Hebrew University about the advertisements and the upcoming election.
I think they might be. Of course, this is only something marginal, but that the change of 1 or 2% might be crucial when time comes for forming the coalition after the elections. So I think that's it. We're talking about a few percent that can move from one side to the other.
We're about 2 weeks away from the election. As we get closer to the day of balloting, do you expect the political ads to become more negative, to be more mudslinging?
I think that generally speaking, some of the parties do have an interest to use negative propaganda. Just to give you 2 examples, I'm sure that Shas, for instance, is after votes of Likud, and they will definitely emphasize the fact that all the troubles for the poor people, etc., are caused by Netanyahu. Netanyahu himself, I guess, will attack Kadima, mainly because these are the more important votes for him, rather than to keep a very fierce battle on his right. And because of that, I expect to have in the Likud campaign many personal attacks on Ehud Olmert, etc.
How important will the issue of corruption be in this campaign?
I think it is, but the problem is that there are too many people who are touched by corruption on all parties. And there are few parties that can say, well, it's nothing, it has nothing to do with us. So, it can work both sides. And because of that, on one hand, I think it's a major issue in Israeli politics today. But on the other hand, it's very dangerous to touch it. I think it will be touched. It will be used by different parties.
According to the latest polls, there are still some 20% of Israeli voters undecided as to which party they're going to vote for. If you could speak to the campaign managers of the various parties, and there are many, what advice would you give them as to how to reach these undecided voters?
It depends on what party you're talking about. It depends on what kind of public constituency you want to move. But generally speaking, I think the atmosphere is definitely quite negative. On one hand, Kadima might be interested in a very calm 3 weeks until election day, but other parties, both Labour and Likud, for instance, might be more aggressive.
The Progressive Socialist Party MP Wali Jumblat met with U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice yesterday in the presence of Telecommunication Minister Marwan Hamedi. Jumblat said he sought Rice to get U.S. support for the Sidr Intifada and protection from the danger of the Syrian regime. Rice assured Jumblat of U.S. backing for the Lebanese government in its path towards democracy and reforms. Jumblat is expected to meet today with UN Secretary General Kofi Annan in New York. May Fawaz reports.
After the 40-minute meeting between MP Walid Jumblat and Condoleezza Rice, the State Department echoed the U.S. Secretary of State, saying that the Lebanese people had accomplished much over the past year, troops to withdraw from the country and held free and fair parliamentary elections, but that there were still other issues that needed to be taken up. Jumblat and Rice met less than a month ago when the American Secretary of State visited Lebanon. According to the State Department, Rice stressed yesterday on the free and fair presidential elections as called for in Security Council Resolution 1559 and assured Jumblat of U.S. backing for the Lebanese government and the need for Syrian compliance with UN resolutions. Jumblat, in turn, said he discussed with Rice the application of the Ta'if Accords, which encompass sending the Lebanese army to the south. He also discussed the necessity to reach a deal with Hezbollah, similar to the one that applied to other armed factions in 1992. Jumblat also called for U.S. support for the Cedar Intifada and protection from Syrian danger and Iranian expansion in the region. He said he would be working to remove President Emil Lahoud peacefully, expressing his wish that the dialogue would lead to the election of a new president capable of protecting Lebanon. Before his meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State, Jumblat spoke before a crowd at the Brookings Institution and vehemently attacked Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, slamming him as a dictator whose behavior could not be changed. He called on the USA and the international community to intensify pressure over Damascus by imposing strong economic sanctions. He reiterated that the Shib'a farms were not Lebanese and urged Hezbollah to surrender arms and dismantle its Kut militia, just as Jumblat claimed to have done after the war. Jumblat said his movement would hold mass anti-Syrian rallies if the national talks made no headway, adding the March 14 movement refused to accept a compromise which would have removed Lahoud but allowed Hezbollah to keep its arms. Jumblat said he wanted the Bush administration to help strengthen Lebanon's army so that it could be a viable alternative to Hezbollah, particularly in the country's south. In a statement distributed yesterday night, Jumblat also said he supported dialogue as well as the formation of a dialogue committee to support the work of the government in handling the Palestinian weapons.
Hamas leaders have confirmed that recent threats by Israel to assassinate the Palestinian acting prime minister, Ismail Haniyeh, will not intimidate the Palestinian people or compel them to abandon their national rights. Meanwhile, thousands of Palestinians held funeral processions for 6 martyrs killed by an Israeli air missile, which targeted a car carrying a number of activists from the Jerusalem Brigade, the military wing of Islamic Jihad.
Israeli political parties competing in the upcoming parliament elections set for March 28, 2006 started to launch their campaign platforms using various media outlets. Israeli politicians began inciting hatred and hostility against Palestinians as a way to garner support for their parties. While some Israeli candidates called for mandatory expulsions of Palestinians, others have called for their separation and isolation. Some political parties called for an escalation against Palestinian factions in order to achieve safety, security, and stability in the region. By looking at Israeli candidates' election platforms, one can tell that Israel is trying to declare an all-out war against the Palestinians. Meanwhile, the Israeli acting prime minister and head of the Kadima party, Ehud Olmert, announced that his party is working on a unilateral plan to separate the West Bank from Israel and declare Jerusalem as its capital. He also confirmed that Israel will expel a number of local residents from Jerusalem to change its democratic makeup and maintain a Jewish majority there.
Obviously, Israel is trying to change the demography in Jerusalem by expelling many Palestinian residents in order to maintain a Jewish majority. Israel is working on a plan to keep only 40,000 or 50,000 Palestinians in the Holy City, including those who are issued Jerusalem identifications.
Amidst ongoing Israeli escalation against the Palestinians, the Israeli Minister of War, Shaul Mofaz, vowed to assassinate Ismail Haniyeh, the acting Palestinian Prime Minister and a prominent Hamas leader. Mofaz threatened that Haniyeh and other Palestinian leaders are not safe and that they may be targeted and assassinated.
Regardless of his political position, no one suspected of terrorism is immune from assassination. I think this is an Israeli principle.
متورط في أي عمل إرهابي لا توجد عليه حصانة مهما كان مركزه السياسي.
أما الأحزاب المعتدلة الإسرائيلية بنظر الإسرائيليين فهي أيضا لم تخفي تطرفها تجاه.
Even some of the more moderate Israeli parties, including the Labour Party led by Amir Peres, incited hatred and extremism against Arabs, calling for the expansion of settlements and the unification of Jerusalem. The Likud party, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, was no exception. Israeli political parties competing in the parliament elections set for March 28, 2006, started to launch their campaign platforms by promoting hatred, extremism, and escalations against the Palestinians.
أواخر هذا الشهر خضر شاهين العالم القدس المحتلة.
Hamas leaders have confirmed that recent threats by Israel to assassinate the Palestinian acting prime minister, Ismail Haniyeh, will not intimidate the Palestinian people or compel them to abandon their national rights. Meanwhile, thousands of Palestinians held funeral processions for 6 martyrs killed by an Israeli air missile, which targeted a car carrying a number of activists from the Jerusalem Brigade, the military wing of Islamic Jihad.
While Israeli warplanes continue to target Palestinians, including women, children, civilians, political activists, and leaders, the Israeli Minister of War made a threat to assassinate Ismail Haniyeh, the Palestinian acting prime minister and a prominent Hamas leader. Hamas leaders have confirmed that this recent Israeli threat will not intimidate the Palestinian people, force them to surrender, or compel them to make unilateral concessions.
مفاز يحاول أن يبتز حركة المقاومة الإسلامية حماس كي تتراجع عن موقفها الثابت.
Mufaz tried to intimidate the Islamic resistance movement Hamas in order to change its firm position. He wants to rally support amongst Israeli voters in favor of his party, Kadima, which is competing in the upcoming legislative elections. Mufaz and all leaders of the Zionist entity must know that Hamas will not change or alter its firm position.
أن حماس عند موقفها الثابت لن تغير ثوابتها.
Thousands of angry Palestinians held funeral processions to 6 martyrs killed in an Israeli air raid, targeting 2 activists from the Jerusalem Brigades, the military wing of the Islamic Jihad. The victims included 2 sibling children from Al-Batish family and 4 civilian pedestrians.
The entire world, including some Arabs, refer to Palestinians as terrorists. Who is the terrorist? The Israelis killed my children who were playing on the porch. One of our neighbors was also killed by the Israelis. My cousin also sustained serious wounds, and she is still in the intensive care unit. Another cousin has lost her eye, and yet another cousin was injured, and she's still in the hospital. All of the victims were young children, and now my 2 young children were martyred. God bless them. God is our Savior, and He may give us strength.
A number of local residents have sustained serious to life-threatening injuries in a new wave of Zionist bloody escalation against the Palestinians.
The Israeli message to the Palestinians was clear. It is an elaborate scheme of bloodshed and killing amongst our people. We call on the world to stand by our people and help them achieve their rights of freedom and independence. Our message to Israel is that the resistance will avenge the death of innocent people killed in Israel air raids. The resistance will punish the occupiers in the right place and at the right time. We will not stand silent regarding these crimes.
By spilling Palestinian blood, the Zionists hope to intimidate and spread chaos in the Palestinian territories prior to the formation of the new Palestinian government, and to gain political support among Israeli voters prior to the Zionist legislative elections. Meanwhile, the Palestinians affirm that they will continue to fight and resist the occupation.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.